child dedication. So if you've never been baptized as an adult, as a public declaration of faith, we already have a couple people that are interested. So please come see me or one of the pastors, and we will talk and we will get that sorted out. So it's going to be one of the last 2 weeks in January. And so just do that. If you have a child or some children that you've never dedicated to the Lord, this would be a great opportunity. We'll be doing that in January. So if you could just keep that in mind, that'd be great. Christmas is often such an exciting time, but it's a time that some people have a really hard time at Christmas because they suffer loss and in the past. But this Christmas, Norm and Tanya aren't here. Norm is normally playing, get it? See what I did there? Normally plays the electric guitar. And Norm lost his dad on Christmas Eve. And so all the details are on Facebook for the viewing and for the funeral and things like that. So if you could just keep the family in prayer. All the proceedings will be in Rogersville, where the family's from, but please keep them in prayer. Also, Jeremy DeVito, Pastor Natasha's husband, his dad passed away quite suddenly, as did Norm's dad, and so we would ask for prayer for both those families. So ever have a really good idea that you think's this really good idea? Well, I had a really good idea for the final sermon for the year. And I was reading on Twitter this week that this is the week that people get, they say, I was reading just this morning actually, like, this guy tweets out, he says, to all the youth pastors that get to preach for the final Sunday of the year because no one shows up at church on the last Sunday of the year, so they get the youth pastor to do it, which I don't think is very nice. You guys are stuck with me, and you're here, so that's awesome. But this idea that I had was called the cutting room floor. And movies are, the cutting room floor is kind of this idea of this room that when they're making a movie that they would go in the room and when they're editing the movie, and there's certain things that wouldn't make the movie. There's always scenes that don't make it. If you watch a DVD, which no one ever does anymore hardly, there's always scenes at the end that didn't make it, they got cut. And they ended up on the cutting room floor. There's books that people write that they have to edit out part of the book and they end up on the cutting room floor. And sometimes it's because the movie went in a different direction, or they had two endings, or they had two ideas, or different things. But for different reasons, or the story's too long, and so they have to cut things out. And so that was my idea for this cutting room floor sermon. This was my idea, okay? And my idea was that as I speak throughout the year, there's tons of things that I have to cut out because of time, or if we're like doing a 4-part series, there's like this 5th part that I'm like, I should do this sometime, but we don't have time, so it gets cut out. And I was going to just come up with all these things, go back through all the series that I spoke, and pull out a bunch of things that got cut to the floor, and I was going to share them with you today. You're like, that's a great idea. Well, we're going to do that next year. So, as you know, if you attend church here, you know that I like to speak in series. A series is just a group of messages that we put together. It's generally 3 to 8 weeks long. And for me, it's a bit of a process to figure out what God would have us to hear and have us to learn throughout the year. Generally, I try to alternate between sermons that are really filled with truth, meaning that might be a little bit harder to hear, and then alternate to a series that maybe is more loving, and maybe easier to hear. You say, well, why do you do that? Well, life is really hard. And a lot of us get beat up during the week, and life can be really difficult. The last thing you want to do is come to church every week and feel like someone kicked you the whole time you were here before you left. We often will alternate between some things that are maybe deeper theologically, and then we'll alternate to something that's maybe more practical, like a series on relationships. And every summer I'll spend some time thinking and praying about what God would have us to talk about the next year. So this past year, in August, I spent some time thinking about January and February and March and April. And people will, there's two camps about that. Some will say, oh, well, that's not very spiritual because planning ahead. I guess my theology is this. If God can tell me what to say on Saturday for Sunday, he can tell me what to say in August for March. He's God. And so in 2020, which is crazy to even think about, I remember 1984 turning to 1985, being convinced that was the last year I was ever going to live on earth, that Jesus was going to return. And it didn't help that my parents kept scaring me about that. We had a guest one time at our house. I think his name was Terry. I don't remember much about Terry. But I remember one time I went out in the living room, and Terry had taken all of his clothes and laid them out on the couch like he had been raptured. They were all like in the shape of his body. His shoes were there, his pants were there, everything was there. And I remember I was like, I don't know, 5 years old or something. I'm like, I wish we'd all been ready. I don't know what I was thinking, but I remember being scared. But 2020, next Sunday actually we have a guest that's going to be here. It's the guest that was supposed to be here when you guys did the surprise for being here for 11 years. It's going to be really exciting. I would not miss next Sunday. It's going to be great. In January, we're going to be doing just a short 3-part series called #Selfie Awareness. And it's going to be really looking introspectively to us. If you want to know where you want to go, first, take it from me. First, you got to figure out where you are. And this is going to be a series that's really going to look in. So, how self-aware are you? In February, we're going to be doing a 4-part series. I'm so excited about this. I really wanted to do it in January. I was that excited about it, but I really felt that we should do it in February. And it's going to be a 4-part series. So we're going to be actually talking about this series over numerous weeks leading up to it, because it's very, very important. And we're going to be doing some things that I know is going to stretch us and make us feel a little uncomfortable. But the series is called Prodigal God. And this is a series that has some small groups mixed in with it. And it's going to be something that I believe can absolutely change our lives forever. And we're going to be doing that. Then in March, we're going to be doing a short series called Dabble. And do you know what the word dabble means? Maybe it's an English word, but it's a word. Dabble is a word. It's like mean that you do a little bit of it. You just dabble in it. They'll be like, hey, do you play golf? No, I just kind of dabble. Like, do you play guitar? I dabble, which means I can play 3 chords. Okay, I dabble. And so it's going to be this idea of dabbling. What are things as Christians that we should not be dabbling in? And sometimes we think that we can mix all these other things with Jesus and create this potion. But really there's things in our world that we should not be dabbling in. And so that's going to be our first 3 series of the year, unless God changes our minds and our hearts about that. The thing about a sermon is it takes me anyways, it takes everyone different times, but it takes about 8 to 15 hours to prepare a sermon. Preaching is like giving birth on Sunday and finding out you're pregnant on Monday. Not the pain. No ladies that had babies, please don't throw anything at me. I don't mean the pain of it. I mean this constant state of preparing and trying to hear what God would have us to say. I have set times throughout the week that I prepare. And then on Saturdays I come in kind of 2 to 5 hours on a Saturday, not to prepare, but that's when actually things end up on the cutting floor. Because I'm like, Troy, you're going to bore these people to death. This is going to be way too long. And so I'll try, and you're like, wow, you cut stuff out? You're still that? Yeah, I know. And I still like cut out this, I don't want any comments, okay? So I cut things out. You're like, wow, you cut? Yes, I do. And Penny says, keep cutting. That's what she says, but which is funny because her last name's Cutting. But anyways, her maiden name. But, so that's when things kind of end up on the cutting floor. It's usually because there's too much time or too much information. So today I wanted to look back at these series, and that ended on the cutting floor. But this week, As we talked about, Norm's dad passed away suddenly, and that has a way to make you think about life. And then Jeremy's dad passed away, and I've known Jeremy's dad since I was 12 or 13 years old. And all of a sudden, this whole idea of this cutting floor kind of just all morphed differently in my mind because of the loss that we've walked through. Jeremy's dad was a week away from turning 85. He was 47 years. He was a pastor. For 30 years, he pastored a little church in Parsboro, Nova Scotia. Anywhere between 12 and 20 people. For 30 years. All the churches that he pastored were small. But he was faithful, and he loved the people, and he loved the community. Last Saturday, he wasn't feeling well, and this is kind of where the thoughts really came for me. And his voice was weak, his legs were giving out because he had bad knees, and he had cancer for quite a long time. But he was a tough Italian fellow, Enrico DeVito. And he was ready for Sunday as he was for the 47 years previous. And his wife, who was trying to get Henry to slow down, for like the last, 20 years. Slow down. She said to him, Henry, you know what would be really good? Is if tomorrow, if you didn't preach because you're not feeling well and you're feeling so weak, why don't we just do a Christmas carol and sing? And the people will understand. He said, no. He said, I got a message that I need to preach. He said, no. And that's where this whole idea, see, Henry wasn't willing to leave anything on the cutting room floor. He said, no. So that Sunday, as he did every Sunday, he got up in his little church. He led worship. He ran the soundboard, because it's right on the platform. He flipped the slides, and he preached. He preached about how this world would have many troubles, but how Jesus was the hope of the world. At the end, he was weak, so he called up a friend in church to close in some songs. And he sat with her. Then his church, they all turned and they prayed for him. And they prayed for a Christmas miracle. The next day at 3 p.m., he wasn't feeling good, and so his wife took him to the hospital. He felt good enough to tell his wife how to drive when she was going there to the hospital. He felt fine enough for that. Slow down, it's slippery. Go right, go this way, it's shorter to go this way. Go that way. When he got to the hospital, they gave him some oxygen. He just fell asleep. Before midnight, he was gone. You might be thinking this morning, Troy, what does this have to do with us? We didn't know Henry. And a quote by Francis Chan came to mind this week is this: our biggest fear should not be failure. Our biggest fear should be succeeding at something that doesn't really matter. So often we live our lives for things that don't matter. See, this isn't about being a pastor or being an electrician or being a pastor or being a stay-at-home mom. This is about living your life for things that matter. Psalm 90, verse 12 says this. It says, teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Or as the Living Bible says, it says this: teach us to number our days and recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. I think we need to understand that this doesn't mean to count our days. This means to make our days count. This isn't at the end of every day like we do before Christmas, scratch off only 23 more days. It's not counting our days. It's making our days count. It's not about giving an account for them, although we will give an account for our days someday. It's about making our days count. How do we spend our days? As we end this year, let that be a question for all of us as we head into 2020. How will we spend our days? Ephesians 5:15 says this, so be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. One of my favorite Bible verses is this, Philippians 2:17. But even if I'm poured out like a drink offering, and the sacrifice and the service coming from your faith, I'm glad and I rejoice with all of you. Just think of that picture of our lives being poured out like a drink offering. Philippians 2:17. Paul describes this joy of being able to serve. He refers to our life as a drink offering. I think most of us wouldn't know this, and I didn't know this until I looked back. This refers to this Old Testament practice of pouring a drink offering in worship. It's found in Numbers 5:1-10 and 28:1-8. After a priest would sacrifice a lamb, a ram or a bull, they would pour wine beside the altar. And this was a symbol that their life was worship to God, because that's how they worshipped. In Paul's life, he felt his life was being poured out as an act of worship on behalf of those that he served. Even if he was in prison, even if his prison life ended in death, he would count it as joy, as if he had been poured out as a service to God. At the end of his life, Paul would make a similar statement in 2 Timothy 4:6. For I am already poured out as a drink offering, that my time of departure has come. This drink offering, symbolized in the Old Testament, was like the end of service and death. They were closely associated with each other. The truth is, nobody in this room wants to die. But the truth is, we will all die. I mean, if Christ does not return for us, we will all die. The question that I've left asking myself is, how will I live to 20? I knew Henry for a really long time, and he lived his life poured out like a drink offering. He was an Italian man. He was the kindest, grumpy man I ever met. Like, I remember walking into his house, and he'd be reading the newspaper. I know, many of us don't even know what newspapers are anymore. They're these papers you used to get every day to read. And he would be reading them, and he'd look over the paper, and he's like, what are you doing here? But that was his way of saying, I'm so glad you're here. He lived his life as this offering that was poured out. And I need you to understand, I need me to understand today, that same call is for you and for me. We don't worship like we did in the Old Testament, where we pour the wine and it was a symbol of our offering. We actually live our life as a poured out offering. It's the same call as we end this year for me and for you. The question I have for us this morning is, will you use your gifts? Will you be generous with what God has given you? Your time, your talents, your generosity. What will your kids, your wife, your husband, friends say about you when life comes to an end? I mean, will you continue to be bitter or unforgiving? we too concerned with keeping score than making your life count? Yesterday, as I went to the funeral, I have to be honest with you. When we went to the fellowship room after, I spent all of my time avoiding 3 people. And it became evident to me that I had let something get bitter in my heart. Are we too busy keeping score than just making sure that our lives count? Will you continue succeeding? Will I continue succeeding at things that don't matter? We say it all the time. It was so awesome this weekend. I watched 37 episodes on Netflix. Wow. We should be so proud that we wasted 36 hours of time. We can be so invested in a hobby or making money that we forget that we've been placed on this earth to pour out our life like a drink offering. I'll tell you what, for me, not us, not this church, we are here to expand the kingdom of God. Henry never spoke to hundreds of people. He probably never preached to 100 people. He never made a lot of money. He never pastored a large church. But he made a difference because he did what mattered most. He loved God and he loved people. And it doesn't matter today if you're a pastor, if you're a stay-at-home mom, if you're a teacher, if you're unemployed, you have the same call in your life as I do, to love God and to love others. Amen. We all need to do that. So earlier in the week, I had gone through the series and I picked up all these things that I had left on the cutting floor. And I had this check in my heart. Troy, don't worry about what was left on the cutting room floor of your sermons. You need to warn people so that they don't leave things on the cutting room floor of their life. The question is, what are you leaving undone? Many of you in this room, you have gifts that you do not use, that God has actually imparted those gifts to you, and you have buried them. You have talents and abilities that you have actually not used. That you have kept unforgiveness in your heart. That God has continued called you to surrender your life to Him. But you haven't. You've left it on the floor. You know that reading His Word is so important, but you cannot or will not make time for that, and you've left it on the floor. You know that praying is something that you need to do every day to stay in communion with Him, but you only pray when you need something. You have left prayer on the cutting room floor. You know that you need to be involved in a small group and you need to be growing, but you can't make time or you won't make time, and you've left it on the floor. You are here and you are drowning in debt, and you're like, I need to get out of debt, but you have left it on the cutting room floor. Because it's going to be hard and it's going to take work. You're here and you use age as an excuse. You'll say, yeah, but I'm not as young as I used to be. Well, none of us are as young as you used to be. Even if you're 5, you never have been older than you are right now. Are you living a life that fills heaven and makes sure that hell is emptied? In closing today, what is God wanting you to do in 2020? Here's a quote that wraps it all up for me. Some want to live within the sound of a church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue mission within a yard of hell. C.T. Studd. Some want to live by the sound of a church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue mission within a yard of hell. That was Henry. He poured out his life as a drink offering. And there will be hundreds of people in heaven because of Henry. A simple man who loved God and loved others. And he lived the same calling as you and I are asked to live. To pour out our life, to use our gifts, our talents, our abilities, and to run a rescue mission within a yard of hell. So in closing today, what do you think God wants you to do in 2020? What's something that you have left on the cutting floor where he's asked you, but you didn't do it? So in closing, we have two things to do, this and one more thing. Would you stand, not all together, one at a time, if you feel, and just say, this year God wants me to, whatever it is. You're a drink offering. You've been called to pour it out. To live a life worthy of the calling. So this morning, for the next 2 minutes, would you be brave enough? I believe God wants me to